Hey, Slater Crusaders. America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Impeachment trial picks up again, coming around noon Eastern today. I want to say something in this segment that if you want to take it out of context, then you can, and whatever. But I think it's a perspective that needs to be added to what's been going on these last couple days from the Democrats. So first of all, we've talked the last few days about why the Democrats are doing this. First, to unify their party against a common enemy. Trump is that common enemy. Second, to make big donors happy, right? Big donors are happy that the Democrats are sticking it to Orange Man bad. And the third, it gives the Democrats the opportunity to force the country to relive what happened on January 6th through their lens, right? And through whatever manipulated way they want to frame it. Manipulated / incomplete. And then, of course, the media will gleefully go along because Trump helps their ratings. So they'll go with it. So the prosecution gets to go first, and the defense goes last. And that's for good reason. We do it that way, right? Trump's lawyers have the opportunity, when it's their turn, to flip this against the Democrats. There's a lot of different ways they can do it, but the very basic one is, oh, you think this rhetoric is bad from Trump that you played? What about this? I want 16 hours of Democrats using the word fight to their political supporters. Right? We need to fight. We need to attack. We need to get them. All that rhetoric. I want all that. I want 16 hours of that. Followed by Trump's call on January 6th to march to the Capitol building peacefully, to make your voices heard. This really should not be this hard to really make this backfire on the Democrats, especially because you have the last word. Now, based on what we saw from Trump's lawyers on the first day, I don't have faith that they'll be able to pull it off, but alas, we'll see. Here's what I want to do in this segment, because this is what this country needs right now. Some perspective. And it's true for almost everything, because everyone's on outrage mode all the time, right? Everyone's on blow everything out of proportion mode all the time. And we have it so good in our country that we just need to make everything be the worst thing in the whole world. Don't let the left gaslight you as to what happened on January 6th. Don't let them write the history of it entirely themselves, knowing that they have zero intent or desire to paint an accurate, complete, full picture of what happened and all the type of people who were there and all the motivations of all the people who were there, etc. So the point of this segment is perspective. The left has lived for 4 years in a psychotic fever dream. I'm not exaggerating, people have gone to therapy because they're freaking out about this man in the White House who may start a war at any moment. I read an Atlantic article the other day, and this person was like, I wake up in the middle of the night and I check my phone because I'm so scared he shattered another alliance. Shattered another, what are you talking? And he's gonna start wars. He's ended wars, okay? So they have lived in this fever dream for 4 years. Yesterday on my radio show, we did a segment on how hate is addictive. Hate's a drug, and they're addicted to hate. Anyway, they've made up this nightmare, and they want you to live in it with them. And they're gonna whip up emotions and make you feel like what happened on January 6th was way worse than it was. Now, here's where people can misinterpret if you want to. I'm not saying it was nothing. Not saying it was good. But let's put it in its proper place, all right? They need to make it way worse than it was, like AOC last week, right? Making it like a near-death experience. Like all the congressmen and senators were bound and gagged and lined up, but miraculously rescued by SEAL Team 6, right? They need to make it seem like they narrowly averted death. Or they need to make it seem like Trump somehow got SEAL Team 6 to do his bidding and take over the Capitol themselves, as opposed to like this guy. Okay? Now, of course, there were lots of different experiences that day. There were nuns there, okay? Right, I mean, but like, there's a whole spectrum of people who were there, right? If you want to paint the broadest brush, I think the people in question, for the most part, the people who entered the Capitol, I think there are people who got whipped up. They thought they could play pretend tough guy. And they're like, let's storm the Capitol! Not thinking they could, right? Just be a tough guy. Oh, we got it. And then they did, and it worked. Uh-oh, they got inside. And then they just walked around and meandered about. Everyone's making up movies in their head, right? We've all seen the picture of the guy who thinks he's a shaman with the horns on his head and everything in the Senate chamber. And if you see that picture, right? If you just see the picture, he's up there, you know, on the where the vice president usually sits, and you see a picture and he's all like, ugh, and you make a movie in your head about like this was like some violent takeover from this guy, and he barged through the doors and wrestled past police and ran up to Pence's chair and declared triumphant victory. We make up these huge dramatic like Michael Bay movie scenes in our head. And then there was a reporter from the New Yorker who was standing there, and here's how it really happened in real life.
Hey, man. Glad to see you guys. You guys are patriots. Look at this guy. He's got covered in blood. God bless you. You good, sir? Do you need medical attention?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.
I got shot in the face. I got shot in the face with some kind of plastic bullet.
Any chance I could get you guys to leave the Senate wing?
We will. I've been making sure they ain't disrespecting the place.
Okay, just want to let you guys know, this is like the sacredest place.
Like, what a surreal, weird, but way less dramatic than the siege, right? So this video right here, same New Yorker reporter. This is actually, unless the New Yorker spliced it and put it out of order, but at least in the 12-minute video of the New Yorker that they published, this is actually before that moment. Look at these people just meandering.
Hey, get out of that chair.
No, this is our chair!
I agree with you, brother, but it's not ours.
We're a democracy.
It belongs to the Vice President of the United States when he's in here. It's not our chair. Look, I love you guys, you're brothers, but we can't be disrespectful.
Don't disrespect.
They can steal the election, we can't sit in their chair?
No, we're not putting up with that either.
Please, you can't.
It's just, look, it's a PR war, okay? You have to understand it's an IO war. We can't lose the IO war. We're better than that.
So see the ticker on the bottom here, or the caption or whatever, what actually happened on January 6th? There it is. My point is, you can't tell, you can't make a declarative statement about it. That's my point. I'm not the one here who's gonna be like, this is what happened. And there are a lot of people there with a lot of different experiences and motivations, et cetera. But I can tell you it's not what the Democrats painted the last 2 days, or it's not entirely what the Democrats painted the last 2 days, and we need to keep that in mind. I talked to someone on my radio show the other day who was there, and she went and she saw the speech, and then she went shopping. Okay, so that was her experience on January 6th. So like, what happened on January 6th? Like, right, it depends. But do not let the Democrats trick you into thinking that what they're presenting is all that happened. This was from a 60 Minutes interview with Pelosi and Leslie Stahl. And Leslie Stahl is touring the destruction and the damage of Pelosi's office. Now, we need a little trigger warning for this video. Brace yourselves.
Check this out. We are inside her Nancy Pelosi's office.
Across the hall, a group broke into the Speaker's private office.
Oh, wow.
They
Oh, wow.
You see what they did to the mirror there? The glass was all over the place. They took
They smashed it.
computer and all that stuff, but laptop. And then the desk that they actually were at was right there that they defamed in that way. But feet on the desk.
They smashed it. Leslie, I love that. Leslie, they smashed it. Oh, wow. I can't, I've never seen anything like it. Have you ever seen the meme? It happens a lot here in California. There'll be like an earthquake. It'll be like a 4 on the Richter scale. It's like no big deal. But everyone freaks out about it. Or there'll be, there's like reports of a hurricane coming or a tornado coming, and everyone freaks out, but then it peters out and there's really nothing that really happens. And this meme usually goes around. It says, we will rebuild. Right? We will. Leslie Stahl walked in like a bomb went off, and they were touring the smoldering rubble, the charred bodies of Pelosi's staff, caught off guard by the insurrectionists who got these grenade launchers when Trump opened up the armory. She walks in, oh, it's too much to bear. The humanity, they broke a mirror. How will we ever recover? I don't know, swing by IKEA. Get a new mirror, put it in the frame, like you'll be fine. And the guy who defaced her desk was a 60-year-old guy from Arkansas. He said he got a cut on his finger and some blood got on one of her envelopes, and he took it and he folded it up and put it in his pocket and left her a quarter. He said, I'm not a thief. Now listen, I'm not saying what these guys did was nothing, right? They should be arrested and charged appropriately, whatever that means. It could be years in jail. But let's not act like this is the end of the republic. Like this is the worst thing that ever happened in history. Like people were beheaded or hanged and the Capitol building's been burned to the ground. So I say this from first of all perspective, but also think about what this trial is, right? The trial is, did the president, the former president, inspire this? You're like, okay, but what even is this? What was the thing that was so bad that he inspired that we need to lock him up forever? Right? They're literally acting like he passed out weapons and Trump took over the military and ordered the 101st Airborne to fly in and land on the roof. And come on, lighten up, everyone. I got little kids. I do this all day, every day. I'm telling everyone to lighten up, right? I got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old and an 11-month-old. And the 2-year-old will take the 4-year-old's toy or vice versa. And the kid whose toy got it taken away acts like someone just smashed a cinder block over their head and they're freaking out. And you just have to, everyone put the toy down, come over here, deep breaths, just talk it out, right? Everyone's feeling, my 2 and 4-year-old, they're feeling in that moment. And you have to train them to see what's really happening and we can work through this. It'll be okay. The left, the media, right? They're acting like Trump is on trial for war crimes. Silly people, get a hold of yourself. But they just want to bring all this, want to pour salt in the wounds of it all. And it's going to hurt our country in the process. I wish Trump's lawyers could get someone who lived through a real coup. You know, where things get blown up and people die and then people, you don't speak out against it because you fear you're going to get your head cut off as well. I think this is what Trump's lawyers should do. You get 2 people, right? One, someone who lived through a real coup, like with tanks, right? Like a real coup where the military takes over, right? Tell these senators what a real coup looks like, right? Crying over a paper cut of coups. And then get someone who led a coup. Like there's got to be some former military leader from some banana republic who led a coup, who could say, all right, American senators, let me tell you. You think this was a coup? Let me tell you about a coup. And the best the left could come up with is, oh yeah, but I really liked that mirror and they broke it. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So there needs to be a real investigation on one thing, and then the media needs to do their job on another. So let's start first with the thing that the media needs to do. The fact that, well, we don't know the fact, the Democrats say that 7 people died because of the Capitol riots. When they did their big video presentation, this was the last screenshot from the Democrats' case, right? At least 7 people lost their lives. How about that addition? At least 7. Really? I remember it started out as 3, right? Like in the week of it all, it was 3 deaths. And we did a segment on that when that happened. And I said, wait a second. 2 of those deaths were like, they were just at the rally, but not necessarily because of the riot. But again, the movie's in our head, right? If if the Democrats say, oh, someone died at the riot, then you're assuming that they got trampled to death or something, right? But we don't know. One guy had a heart attack, another guy had a stroke. I can't even tell you where it happened. It kind of ties into the last segment. Where did the guy have a heart attack? Where did the guy have a stroke? But we all have a vision in our head of where it happened. If you want this to be the biggest deal in the whole world, then he had a heart attack because he was in the riot and the police were going whatever and it was a big freak out and he keeled over, right? Or he was like a 68-year-old guy who was on the porta potty and had just had a heart attack because people just have heart attacks and this was like before Trump even spoke. I have no idea. I don't know. But heart attacks and strokes happen all the time at concerts. That's why there's ambulances there. If someone had a stroke at a Jason Aldean concert, the newspapers the next day don't run headlines about the ever-increasing death toll of Jason Aldean. Jason Aldean has killed 8 people so far this year in his tour across the country. Like, we don't do that. And now we're told there's 7 deaths. Well, let's run through those. At least 7. It could be more. So 2 police officers, and this is what the media needs to do, right? 2 police officers committed suicide sometime after the riot. What happened there? I don't know. What's the exact connection to the riot? I don't know. What are their families saying about it? But just to make the assumption that it was because of the riot, I think that's a lot. 1 person had a heart attack. 1 person had a stroke, died at the hospital, because that's 4. But again, we don't know where those people had the heart attack or the stroke or why or who they were, or what their preconditions were, or whatever. Another woman, they say, collapsed in the rush, in a rush of people. But where? Where? What kind of rush? Rush to what? Right? The assumption was that she was trampled to death, but who knows? Another officer was killed. We were told it was because he was hit in the head with a fire extinguisher. But the medical examiner says there's no evidence of blunt force trauma at all. So that narrative seems to be going away, and there's been no arrests of what happened. Then you have the woman from San Diego who was killed by the police officer, Ashley Babbitt, I believe is her name. And then you have, that's it. That's 7, right? Yeah, that's 7. So that's 1 confirmed death, like that we know exactly came from the actions of the riot. 1. So why are we throwing around at least 7? Well, it's being used to exaggerate the deadliness of the event, which will then be used to justify further attacks, not just against the former president, but against you. That's why this matters. There's a group called the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, something like that. And they work with Princeton University. They calculate civilian deaths in like war-torn countries around the world. And they calculated 25 deaths by Americans in political demonstrations in 2020. Almost all of those related to Black Lives Matter and George Floyd-related riots. 25 deaths. Now, surely someone at the Washington Post or whatever will fact-check it. And they should, right? But they're gonna fact-check it to death. That's my point. That is the point. Anyone want to fact-check the death toll of at least 7? Or no? Are we just gonna keep making numbers up and just go with it? That's what the community needs to do. On the formal investigation side, will there ever be, and is anyone even talking about, a proper investigation of Capitol security? And specifically, who decided not to have proper security for the counting of the electors on January 6th? Read an article written by a 27-year veteran of the Boston Police Department. He's a senior policy advisor at Homeland Security. His name's Tom Nolan. He said the head of the U.S. Capitol Police, he resigned, right? But who else is to blame for what happened? And he made the point that Washington, D.C. is one of the most heavily policed cities in the world, right? The U.S. Capitol Police, 2,000 officers, a budget of $500 million, and their sole job is to protect the U.S. Capitol. You clearly, anyone would have known that something could have happened that day, right? I mean, I'm sure the Capitol Police, I'm sure they're dealing with people, things every day, all the time. Have you ever been to D.C.? D.C. is really disappointing. And one reason why is all the hippies. There's all these hippies everywhere, camping out, protesting over something all the time. There's always protests going on, right? And they knew that Stop the Steal was coming to town. The president tweeted about it, the whole thing, right? So they had to know that there are going to be some wackos in that group, that you needed to have a police presence to prevent from acting out. Clearly, this is rocket science to figure that out. This Homeland Security advisor guy, he said the Capitol Police were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. He saw videos of police running away from protesters. Many didn't have weapons that they needed. They didn't have protective equipment. They didn't have headgear. They were woefully unprepared for this. So why? Why were there not enough resources deployed for this? Where was the proper fencing around the Capitol even? Right, just like basic crowd control technique. Is anyone gonna ask any questions about this, or are we just gonna let it go? He said he saw no like mine-resistant ambush vehicles, vans, other military-type vehicles, no one on horseback, no one on motorcycle. He said it was nothing like what was on display at the Lincoln Memorial back during the Black Lives Matter riots in June, right? Where it was very military presence. In fact, it was such a military presence then that was the opposite of it. See how we go back and forth? Like, that's why everything's human nature. There's a huge police presence in DC in June, and Nancy Pelosi and others didn't like that police presence. So they went way under what they needed for January 6th. And now, to CYA again, now the National Guard is still in Washington, D.C. D.C.'s still locked down because they got a CYA and now they got to way overcompensate again. Make sense? Now, people take this and they say, Capitol, they make it a race thing, right? Like, the Capitol Hill Police had too much of a police presence during the Black Lives Matter riots because the rioters were black, and they had no presence here because they were white protesters and it's racism, blah, blah, blah. Now, the truth is, Black Lives Matter rioters have been violent all summer long, and Trump protesters have never been violent at any of these rallies anywhere. So I think they got caught flat-footed. And it's a shame because it could have been completely avoided. And it's not just Capitol Hill Police, right? DC is really strange because there's so many jurisdictions in one place. So the Washington, D.C. police, like the city police, has jurisdiction on all the streets. The U.S. Park Police has jurisdiction of what's called the ellipse. It's like, so if you got like the Washington Monument's over here and the Capitol Building's over here, the White House is here. There's like this park right here, and that's the U.S. Park. That's where the rally was. So the U.S. Park Police have jurisdiction here, but not here. And not here, where the White House is, because that's the Secret Service. And they don't have jurisdiction here, because that's the Capitol. And they don't have jurisdiction here, because, right, there's like a million different police forces going on. Right? And then you got the National Guard on top of that. Right? So the National Guard in all the states, the Guard is under the command of the governor of the state. But in D.C., the National Guard is under the command of the president. But usually, orders are deployed through the Secretary of the Army, or, and that's the important part here, at the request of the mayor. So what's the mayor's responsibility here? The mayor said that they're the lead team. They call it the Metro PD. So MPD is the lead law enforcement agency. That's what they said. She sent this out. The MPD, we are the lead law enforcement agency of what's happening. She sent this out on January 5th, the day before. She said, to be clear, the District of Columbia is not requesting other federal law enforcement personnel, discourages any additional deployment without immediate notification and consultation with us, with the Metro Police. What's her responsibility in this? And I'm not saying everyone needs to be fired or whatever. I don't even know what the accountability is because I don't know what the level of failure was. But there was a congresswoman in D.C. who said afterwards that she was told by the police chief and the sergeant at arms that everything's under control and they've provided for every contingency. And she said that turned out to be completely false. So who is responsible for dropping the ball on security? Or are we just content with blaming the former president for everything always? True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, let's get away from the politics of this trial here. Let's get away from the dramatics and the emotions, and let's get back to the Constitution, which is what should matter most here. Our friend Adam Carrington is here. He's a professor at Hillsdale College, and currently he's a visiting fellow of the James Madison program at Princeton University. Professor, how are you, sir?
Doing well. Hope you all are too.
Yeah, we are. Very first question. Do you believe this trial of a former president is constitutional? That was the question of the first day of this whole thing. Is it constitutional? Do you believe it is?
Right. I will say off the bat that I understand why this is very debated, and so there's people I respect a lot that have come down on both sides of it. I think while there's evidence both ways, I would lean toward the idea that at least when the impeachment is done before the president leaves office, that it is still permissible to hold a trial afterwards for actions done while being president of the United States. And there's sort of three reasons why I think the evidence leans heavier that way, even though I think there's sort of, it is admittedly murky. One is the punishment, that if you do believe that not only is impeachment for removing from office, but if there is the option of disqualification, and I know that's a little bit debated, but if there is disqualification, then as long as there's a punishment that can still occur, I think that that's permissible. The second is precedent. We do have English precedent on which Hamilton said we were basing the impeachment power of impeaching and trying officials for actions done while in office afterwards. And we do have one instance during the Grant administration of doing so for a Secretary of War that resigned before being impeached. And then third, I think there is a common sense reason where at least gives the possibility that if someone, and I'm setting aside whatever people think about this current one, if an officer believed that they could just resign to get away from being punished, this would at least be a way, common sense wise, to do that. And I admit there's things pushing the other way, but those are the kind of evidence that if I had to come down, I would lean more in that direction.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that too much. I really appreciate the humility of like I see both sides and it's tricky. We had Seth Tillman on the other day, constitutional scholar, and his argument was that the disqualification is not a thing, because he says, and his argument, I forget it takes too long to navigate around, but that what they meant was that Trump, if he's disqualified, could never hold an appointed position again, but he could run for elected office again. What do you make of that?
Right, and I was thinking particularly of his argument that he made with Josh Blackman together, and I very much respect their opinion. I, by the way, respect Judge Ludwig, who wrote a Washington Post article saying that for other reasons she couldn't. So this is the difficulty, and I'm glad these things are rare and hope they stay rare. The where I'm not entirely convinced is I looked at some of their evidence, and I've seen others that disagree with it, but the particular thing would be comparing two parts of the Constitution. And one is Article 1, Section 3, and I'm going to engage in just a little text reading. I promise it won't be too long, where it says what he's mentioning, that impeachment can't extend further than removal from office and disqualification to hold or enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit. So that's, I think, what they're leaning on, is that this would not be an office of honor, trust, or profit. A little bit later, the next time impeachment is talked about, the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States, this is Article 2, Section 4, shall be removed from office on impeachment for. So both describe the president as an office holder. I'd have to be convinced a little more by their argument that profit, trust, or honor doesn't attach to what the president is doing. You have to say not that it's not an office, because it's described as an office in Article 2, Section 4 explicitly. I need a little more evidence. I'm not quite convinced by their argument that it's one of that it's different from of office of trust, profit, or honor. I admit they found people that agree with them, but if you make me decide, I still am not entirely convinced by that argument.
Let's back it up a second, and I appreciate that. Let's go back a second. Honor, trust, and profit. First of all, I love this stuff. I could geek out on this all day. Why would the founding fathers write a sentence like that? Honor, trust, and profit. By the way, I've gone 36 years of life, and I've never heard that part of the Constitution my entire life until this week, so I'm grateful, if nothing else, for that. But that's so weirdly vague. What is that?
I think if you go back historically, it's actually trying to cover several bases, in my opinion. So the idea is profit. So is it an office where there's a salary from the federal government attached? Trust and honor, I think, have to do with, are you being entrusted or given functions of the government of the United States, and therefore functions of we the people, is the way that I read it. And therefore it's trying to cover, at times there may be people that say, well, I'll take the office with no pay, like President Trump said he would at one point, or others where you may have an office where you represent the United States, or where you're actually given an honorary position for services rendered to the country. It's trying to cover, I think, all of those bases. While it's in some ways vague, it's also meaning to be more specific by not just saying office. It's trying to say, what do we give offices for, in my opinion, is what it's saying.
Yeah, you're right, because they wouldn't have just listed out everything. They couldn't have done that. They were too wise to do that.
Well,
interesting.
Well,
Very good.
Yeah, they knew that other offices would be created. The Constitution leaves a lot of space for what offices are created. So they were looking for categories of why we give offices, not a list of offices itself.
Oh man, our founding fathers. I was just about to criticize the professor, and then I come back and rebuke myself. We have a clip here of Lisa Murkowski. I think she's speaking to this. Let's hear this.
I am looking at what we're seeing now. I have said that I will look to the evidence that is presented. The evidence that has been presented thus far is pretty damning. Frankly, I don't see how after the American public sees the full story laid out here, not just in one snippet on this day and another on that, but this whole scenario that has been laid out before us. I don't see how Donald Trump could be reelected to the presidency again.
So he'll be 78 if he ran again, and I don't think he's running again. I don't think it'd be politically wise for Republicans to have him run again. But I see your point earlier about precedent. So maybe there's something to be said for that. I don't know if you have a comment about that last part, but I do want to ask you about the first thing, the fact that she's a juror, and this idea of impartial jurors, senators as impartial jurors. What was our founders' intent with that? / is that possible?
Yeah, I would say that in some ways, the first comment and the second comment are distinct, in that the first, as far as what she thinks she should do as a senator, is in her purview, and she does need to speak to that. Whether, especially if the president's acquitted, as he likely will be, whether he should be chosen again is really up to the American people, whether she thinks that's a good idea or not, or whether she thinks the American people will or not. It's interesting. Yes, the process of impeachment mirrors imperfectly a judicial process. And the House is meant to accuse, to bring charges, but you're innocent until proven guilty. And the Senate is supposed to sit as a kind of jury, although they have more powers than jurors. They're in some ways able to determine what the rules of their own trial is going to be. So I think it's an imperfect analogy. And the difficulty is something that actually, again, the founders saw. In Federalist 65, Hamilton said, I understand that if we make this process congressional, we're going to risk it becoming very partisan. And if you look at the history of impeachments in American history, typically the votes have been pretty overwhelmingly party line as far as to impeach or not and to convict or not. But Hamilton said, despite that, we think this is the better process. So I do agree that senators in this position should try to be as impartial as possible. But given that Congress itself was established by the founders as a kind of partisan-like branch, I understand that it's just not going to, unlikely to work that way, and it's going to be very hard to work that way.
I should have asked you this. We got about 2 minutes. This should have been the first question. What is the legal claim? This, I guess, ties into partisanship too. What's the legal claim that the Democrats are making for the reason why he needs to be convicted? And then what's the legal defense that you believe Trump's lawyers are going to make? Right, other than, because what I just saw last couple of days is what happened on January 6th was really, really bad. And what people did was illegal. But what's Trump's liability?
Right. And I think the Democrats are making two arguments that are based on an underlying question about impeachment. First, they're making the argument that this was inciting to violence. And the idea is that there is a legal precedent that if you directly incite people to be violent, that would be illegal. I think that's pretty hard to prove, and especially hard to prove under the legal idea, under our legal precedent. The second is the idea that while you maybe couldn't hold him legally liable, that an office holder should be held to a higher than just legal standard, and that his actions leading up to January 6th and his declarations about what was possible and impossible and what had happened were irresponsible enough that no president should have made them. And the underlying question here is, if you believe impeachment should only be for legal crimes, and this came up in the last impeachment, then this won't float. It's a closer, at least a debatable question on the other, where you actually have to get into the details of what you think is responsible and irresponsible presidential rhetoric. And I think what the Republicans will argue, beyond the argument that you can't impeach and remove a former president, I think that's going to be the most convincing for most of the senators, is that you should only be able to impeach for an actual provable crime, and the president would have First Amendment protection for this kind of debate and discussion. So I think I know that's really truncated, but that's a lot in the
No, that's so perfect. You're right. It's almost like people are having two different conversations, the legal conversation and just the merely political one. So, and we got to run here, but do you know what the legal definition of incitement is? What would the president or someone had to have said in order to be like, oh, that's incitement, definitely, without a doubt? You got to go to jail for that.
Yeah, you can't, let's say someone said, I really wish so-and-so were dead. You couldn't get someone for that. But if you verbally said, I want them dead, I know where guns are, I want you to go get guns and shoot them, that is speech attached to illegal action, and that would be a clear example of not allowing it. The example that this came up with was the KKK. So the argument is, even that if you supported the KKK and said positive things about it, that's still protected by the First Amendment, and would still not be illegal. So that would be the example of the legal question.
So if you support the KKK, if you supported the KKK, not incitement. But if you said, hey, Klansmen, come over to my house, I got a bunch of guns, grab them, let's go attack this house, that's incitement.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, very good. Professor, you've cleared this up way more than anyone I've heard the last couple of days. Always grateful for you, Professor. Adam Carrington, Hillsdale, and visiting fellow at the James Madison program. Thank you, sir.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Mike Slater, true story. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, not sure if you were able to watch the entire trial yesterday because you have a life, a job, but if you missed what happened at the end, here's a little snippet.
Statements were
attributed to me moments ago by the House impeachment managers, statements relating to the content of conversations between a phone call involving President Trump and Senator Tuberville, were not made by me. They're not accurate, and they're contrary to fact. I move, pursuant to Rule 16, that they be stricken from the record.
The impeachment manager, Mr. Cicilline, correctly and accurately quoted a newspaper account which the distinguished senator has taken objection to, so we're happy to withdraw it.
It's not true, and it's not
On the grounds that it is not true, and we are going to
repeated it too.
Okay, we're going to withdraw it this evening, and without any prejudice to the ability to resubmit it, if possible, and then we can debate it if we need it. But it's not. This is much ado about nothing because it's not critical in any way to our case.
You're not the one being cited as a witness, sir.
Wow. That's the first time I heard that. Joseph Pinion's here, Republican strategist, chair of the Conservative Color Coalition. That's interesting because, hey, Joseph, how are you?
How are you,
damage is already done, man. That you can just like quote something and then later in the night be like, oh, okay, fine, stricken from the record, whatever. What else do we need to know about what happened there?
Well, I mean, to me, it's just striking because this is a impeachment proceeding to take the unprecedented step of trying to impeach a president who is no longer president. We haven't done anything like this in so long, they had to go back and dig up precedent from 1876. So I think that if Democrats' position is that we are trying to cure the nation of virulent untruth, then fidelity to the facts should be important to them. And yet, as he later said, which is not in that clip, it's much ado about nothing. So I think those will be the words that end up haunting the Democrats because it becomes very apparent as we've gone through this process that this has been less about a search for the truth. This has been more about them continuing to wage this political battle to try President Trump in the court of public opinion, because most legal experts will tell you if they try to try him in a court of law, it probably would not go very well for them.
That's so interesting. So they say the prosecution, the Democrats say it's much ado about nothing, that one specific quote. But the truth is this whole thing is much ado about nothing. Hopefully that's revealed over the next couple of days for most people. Do you know what the quote was that they thought, that they said was Mike Lee but wasn't?
Well, I think he was objecting to the categorization of the conversation as a whole. And I think that that's important because much of the quote-unquote testimony that Democrats are relying upon are words printed in newspapers that are attributed to actual living, breathing human beings. And so, again, if you are willing to take this unprecedented step, then you would think that you would actually call the witnesses. In a court of law, you would hopefully be able to call those witnesses and confront those witnesses. You cannot actually send somebody to jail or convict them based off attributions made in a newspaper. So again, I think that, yes, on some basic level, it may be true that this is not a significant component of their trial, but I think it does show the mindset of the Democrats that, again, they are more interested in waging the political battle than in undertaking a search for the truth and actually having a reckoning that will bring this nation together or, quote unquote, unify us, as they continue to say.
Yeah, which ties in perfectly to our last segment. So I read something, and it may be unrelated. I'm trying to put these all things together. That the president and the president's team tried to call some other senator and accidentally called Mike Lee. Is that like the backstory of what actually happened and why Mike Lee was misattributed in that story? Have you heard any of that?
I mean, look, there is I'm sure where Democrats are going with this, they're going to cite conversations that occurred between the president and Senator Tuberville, conversations or attempted conversations between Rudy Giuliani and members of the Senate. I think overall, again, the problem that we have here is that this entire impeachment affair, Democrats are trying to make the allegation that January 6th is 9/11 and that Donald Trump is himself Osama bin Laden. And I think that when you look at it from that perspective, it makes it very difficult for the average American to make that leap of faith. I think there are people across the aisle who may believe that President Trump did not handle the immediate aftermath of what occurred on January 6th well. But what Democrats are trying to say extends far beyond that. That President Trump is directly responsible for what happened on January 6th. In many ways, they're trying to portray him as somebody who got on Twitter and Parler and planned out these attacks in concert with the people who took the unprecedented step and disgraceful step to basically turn the Capitol into a mob scene. So that is, I think, something that strains credulity for many Americans, and ultimately, I think, will be the fatal flaw of an otherwise misguided impeachment effort.
Do you think what the president said, not only that day at the rally, but leading up to it, was in fact insightful? Tweets like, "Come to this rally, it's wild, and we got to fight," stuff like that. We got to fight like hell. Is that insightful?
Here's the problem, right? Anything that we do, particularly when you're talking about governing a nation of 350 million plus souls and a republic that is supposed to last the test of time, has to be able to be replicated. That means we have to set a standard that we can apply unilaterally. There is nothing that President Trump said individually or that can be not also held that same standard to other politicians, whether you're talking about the words of AOC, who tried to justify the burning down of police stations to hungry bellies. If you're talking about people like Maxine Waters, who have encouraged supporters to find Trump supporters wherever they may roam and antagonize them and confront them through any means necessary. Those are the types of things that we say in a rhetorical flourish in the course of American politics. And I think if we're going to set a new standard that those things are no longer acceptable, number one, that's a dangerous standard to set. But then number two, then you also have to be willing to hold all people to that standard, irrespective of whether you agree with their politics. Democrats aren't trying to do this here. They just want to start and end this standard with President Trump. And that, to me, becomes the problem.
I hope the Trump's lawyers can do as well of a job as I know you could do, laying out that case that the Democrats have been far more irresponsible with rhetoric. And I just want 16 hours of Democrats saying, we need to fight, we need to fight, we need to fight, and all the things that you just cited there as well. Joseph Pinion on Twitter, chair of the Conservative Color Coalition and Republican strategist, show on Newsmax on Saturdays. Mr. Pinion, good to talk to you, brother.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Have a good day. We got the trial coming up. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.